Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today I'm taking a look at the all-new Marvel Legends Sweatin to the Oldies Rogue, also known as Outback Rogue. Starting off with the packaging, and it's a windowless box. We have the vibrant 90s X-Men logo down here, digital render of the figure with some artwork over the shoulder, X logo up top. On one side we get another digital render, and on the other we get some very pretty artwork by J. Scott Campbell. Lost in a vast blue sea of nothing on the back is another digital render, showing just how little we're gonna get. Knowing that the windows are coming back does make me feel a bit better, and the fact that it's an online exclusive, so a window really wouldn't have helped anyway, does ease the pain. And for a character who can't touch you, the J. Scott Campbell artwork is a nice touch. Even so, for packaging, I'm giving Rogue half a point. Moving on to presentation, and at the top of her hair, Rogue stands at 6 1/4 inches. Rogue had a few looks in the 80s, and while this isn't my preferred one, I do get why they did it. In terms of tooling, it's a very simple repaint. Even the seams for the thigh cut magically create the illusion of thigh-high boots. I have, however, heard some complaints about the mold they used for the upper torso. A lot of fans were hoping for this one because of the sculpted seam. But while the painted on costume might seem lazy, this torso has vertical seams running up and down that just kinda disappear, so I'm personally fine with it. That being said, I do wish that paint job could have been just a bit crisper. Like many of you, however, I would have preferred a 6-inch scale version of this. You know, the one based on the wife from Hellraiser? Personally, when I think of 80s Rogue, this is where I go. Thanks to Mohawk Storm, they already have this belt. The only new piece they would have needed is an overlay for the tattered shirt. That said, I really like this face sculpt and appreciate that they modeled it off of that J. Scott Campbell artwork. It's painted very crisply and her smile is very pleasant. Again, zooming in, just look at the wonderful job they did on her makeup. They also used a separate piece for the white streaker in her hair, so it's probably the most vibrant we've ever seen. Flipping it around and there's lots of wonderful curls. Despite cutting corners with the reused body, this is still a very nice looking figure. Honestly, it's the J. Scott Campbell head sculpt that really sells it. She might not be the 80s Rogue a lot of us are looking for, but she's still full of southern charm. For presentation, I'm giving 80s Rogue 1 whole point. Moving on to posability, and at the very least she does benefit from more modern articulation. Well, kind of. Obviously, she can't look up, but she has no problem looking down. Surprisingly, she does get a fair amount of tilt, and side to side. Moving on down, and Rogue can raise her arm up this far. She also has bicep swivel, pinless double-jointed elbows, and swivel hinge wrists. Moving to the middle, and all of her torso articulation is handled by this diaphragm joint. She can arch back this far. To give you an idea of what a flying pose would look like, here you go. And she can hunch forward this far, which admittedly isn't much. She does, however, get a fair amount of tilt and twist. Below the waist, and Rogue has ball-jointed hips. They can kick 90 degrees, and they can split this wide. Traversing down the leg, and again she has thigh cut, pinless double-jointed knees, and ankles that can hinge and pivot. To achieve the death-defying aerobics this costume demands, Rogue needs to be particularly posable. Fortunately, this figure is up to the challenge. All joking aside, she is doing this without a figure stand, so that's gotta count for something. I know a lot of you would prefer more torso articulation in female figures, and that's totally valid. But for a character like this, whose costume is so simple, I prefer to leave that sculpt unbroken. For posability, I'm giving this Rogue 1 whole point. Moving on to playability, and in addition to the open hand she comes pre-posed with, Rogue also comes with a pair of fists. I already knew just how empty this box was going to be, but it doesn't make it any less disappointing. In a situation like this, the ungloved hand option wouldn't have worked, seeing as how the gloves go up to the bicep. And since they based the portrait on this specific piece of artwork, I guess a different head would have been out of the question. In a situation like this, it would be nice if Marvel Legends had their own equivalent of the DC Multiverse flight stand. It'd be a great way of adding some value for flying characters who maybe don't have a whole lot of other accessory options. But let's be honest, the problem wasn't the lack of options, it was the desire to save money. And that's a topic for our next category. But playability is more than just foreshadowing later parts of the video, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. For a small selection of the Rogues that brought us here, and here's the very very first one by Toy Biz. Next is the Toy Biz Age of Apocalypse, Power Slammers, the very anime-looking X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the infamous Marvel Legends figure by Toy Biz, Extreme X-Men also by Toy Biz, the statuesque Marvel Select version, and the aforementioned 3 3/4 inch 80s version. But don't worry, Suga, I'll be showing some more Rogue figures later in the video. First, some era-appropriate X-Men, and here we have the hover chair Xavier in the movie 2-pack wheelchair. For a couple of 80s style Cyclopses, and here we have the Dark Phoenix 2-pack and the Retro card. And then for Storm, here we have the Thunderbird 2-pack and the Apocalypse Wave. For Wolverine, here we have the original brown and orange, and here we have him in the training uniform from Uncanny X-Men 275. For some other classics though, and here's her half-brother Nightcrawler, and although we have yet to get an Outback version, here we have Classic Colossus. Fresh out of Mojo World, and here's Longshot. This is the one from the Mojo World box set. And on that subject, here we have the Mojo World Dazzler and the Retro card, which is much closer to her Outback design. Moving over to some villains though, and here we have Magneto, Rogue's mother Mystique, Emma Frost the White Queen, and Arcade. Making his debut in the 80s, here we have Mr. Sinister. Here we have the Apocalypse Build-A-Figure. Not quite how he looked in the 80s, but still pretty impressive. On the subject of Build-A-Figures though, and here we have Bonebreaker and Juggernaut. This figure is significant because our first Marvel Legends Rogue came in that wave. For just a couple of other large-scale X-Men figures though, and here we have the Blob, the Maniacal Mojo, and Classic Sabretooth from Marvel Select. For a relative scale comparison, here's Outback Storm with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here she is with Stealth Iron Man. You can see my entire Rogue collection in my action figure evolution video, but for now, let's take a look at some head swaps. First up, and here's the Juggernaut Wave version. Unfortunately, the necks aren't exactly compatible, so this one sits way too high, and this one doesn't really click into place, which is a shame because overall I think this head's a real improvement. Even though I'm technically jumping ahead, here we have the Retro card version. Because the Retro card and Juggernaut bodies are the same, that means that the neck problems are also going to be the same. It's a shame because I do kind of like this. The headband might not be entirely accurate, but the greens match, and come on, everybody in the 80s had a headband. Conversely, this one is missing the headband, but I love it. For my money, this might be the closest we've gotten to a Rogue head sculpt that feels like that version of Rogue. If you want to get creative with some sticky tag, this one really is an improvement. Next up is the more modern design. Unlike the other versions, this one clicks into place just fine. Admittedly, it might be slightly too big for this body, but if you want a bigger haired option, this one looks pretty good. Other way around, and I have the reverse criticism. It fits, but it feels like it might be just a bit too small. That's hardly the end of the world when it comes to comics, of course. But the best part is that this Rogue came with an alternate, more serious head. The downside is that this head sits a bit too high. And lastly, here we have Age of Apocalypse. This one fits great and looks great. I owned this figure before reading Age of Apocalypse, so in my mind, the character having bigger hair just makes sense. Other way around, and I like this too. The head fits fine, and the hair is a lot of fun. And thanks to the hair being short, articulation isn't a problem. Individual tastes may vary, but I personally like this better than the way they came. Disappointing as it may be that she only comes with a pair of hands, it's still wonderful to add to our 80s display. Based solely on head swap potential and mixing and matching with my 80 shelf, for playability, I'm giving Rogue 1 whole point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. If it were 2020 and this figure was only $19.99 and still only came with 2 hands, I would complain about the cost. At $25, it's inexcusable. The J. Scott Campbell head is nice, but when that's your only new piece in a severely underpacked figure, Outback Rogue can stay down under. As is unfortunately starting to become a trend with Marvel figures. For price, I'm giving Rogue 0 points for a grand total of 3.5 out of 5. When it comes to complaining about cost, have I lost my touch or am I on the money? Sound off in the comments below. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.